The tourist hotspot of Brighton, England, is packed with New Year's Eve revelers. It's the place to be for any young person looking for a memorable night out. And 24-year-old university student Bill Henham is right in the thick of the action. But as the night winds down, Bill isn't ready to throw in the towel. When he wanders into a warehouse party, his night of bliss and merriment quickly turns into a living nightmare. This shocking night of violence will leave a painful scar on this peaceful seaside town and will forever change a family's life. It's New Year's Eve 2019, and Bill Henham is home from school visiting his family for the holidays. But their idea of a quiet night in doesn't hold much appeal for the young university student.
Bill is at home with his family. He's come home from university to spend Christmas. He's 24 years old, he's a young man, and he wants to go out and party on New Year's Eve.
He was a film student in London, and he was home for the Christmas holidays. So like a lot of people, he'd have been, trying to make the most of that sort of short spell. He lived in a village outside Brighton, and with no disrespect to what is a lovely village, I'm guessing at that age, Bill wanted a bit more sort of life and soul and action for the new year.
Bill and his family live in a small town outside Brighton, England, where there's not a lot going on in terms of nightlife, but thankfully there's a lot of parties to be found in Brighton.
Bill's dad, Ian, offers to drive him the 11 miles to Brighton. Bill isn't meeting up with anyone in particular, and he has no plan to speak of beyond going to a popular bar that often has live bands.
His dad offers to drop him off about 7:30 in the evening. He leaves his keys and his mobile phone at home because he's a little bit worried about losing them.
Bill's dad writes their number on a piece of paper and tells him to call if he needs a ride back home.
And went into the nearest reasonable-sized town.
Bill's not afraid of going into town alone. He'll likely run into someone he knows, or at the very least, find a welcoming party.
A lot of people come down for a night out. A lot of people come down for a weekend, stag parties, hen parties, holiday destination. Brighton is the kind of place where you can go out by yourself and bump into people you know. It's not a huge place, but it's not a tiny place. There are enough people there that you often bump into people you know when you're out and about.
Brighton's a very cosmopolitan city. It's on the south coast of England, right on the seafront. It's got a large pier. People go down there for holidays. It's got a very large LGBTQ community. Yeah, it's a great place to go.
It's got a lively nightlife, but it's got a nice atmosphere to it, Brighton. So, especially on a sunny day, it's a good place to be on the beach.
There is a dark side too, and part of that is the dark side of being a party town. Lots of people out for a good time, drinking, some taking drugs. And the violence that sometimes goes with that, people getting into arguments, people fighting over turf, that sort of thing.
But on this New Year's Eve, the happy-go-lucky Bill Henham has only one thing on his mind: having a good time.
You know, it's a place where people are out, you know, most nights of the week there are people out enjoying themselves in bars, restaurants and so on, and nobody wants to think that it's not safe.
So his dad drops him off and he makes his way to the Concord 2 club. It holds about 600 people, live music going on, quite lively place, enjoyable. So he's there having a good evening, and Bill comes out of the club. One of the doormen sees him coming out and describes him as being happy, merry and smiling. He does make his way back into the club again, and the doorman does escort him out and suggests he goes home, but he sees him walking off and he's happy. That's the description given. He'd had enough to drink and it was probably time to go home.
At approximately 4:30 a.m. New Year's morning, Bill enters the off-license store. He exits moments later.
Then something catches Bill's attention. He hears the sounds of a party in the derelict building across the street and is strangely drawn to it.
Somewhere along the line, he's obviously heard a party going on and decides to investigate. I'm guessing Bill's evening hadn't ended for him. It was 4:30. There's probably no way of getting back to his parents' house, so he was looking for somewhere else to go until he could make his way back. And then came across the party, sadly for him.
I think when Bill walked into the building, he was already, if not intoxicated, in drink. Certainly some way there. So he wasn't in the best state, really, to go into the lion's den, as it were. Bill seems to have been a very lovely, outgoing, kind, decent person, and I think he was moving in a circle where there were people who had had a much harder life, were much more suspicious. In the core of that, some people who really were quite malevolent and not welcoming, who were very defensive about who was allowed in and who wasn't allowed into the place.
Bill has caught the attention of Gregory Hawley, a self-described experienced squatter and the ringleader of the gang at the derelict building.
He's out for a nice evening. He seems he's not an argumentative type of fella who's, you know, lippy, is he? And he just comes across these four who've been drinking and taking drugs and decide that they're going to teach him a lesson to start with.
The next day, January 1st, 2020, with no word from Bill, his father starts to worry.
Since Bill left his phone and his keys with his dad, Ian now has no way of getting a hold of his son.
Bill hasn't contacted his brother or his mom, and stepdad either. No one has heard from him, and his family grows worried. It isn't until the following day, January 2nd, that someone squatting in the derelict building where Bill crashed the New Year's party finally makes a call to police to report their concerns that a murder has been committed.
It's one of the worst case scenarios when you have an abandoned building that's being used by squatters for the purposes of illegal activity in all probability, taking drugs, alcohol, staying there illegally. So when a crime happens in one of these buildings, you have a witness base that is not receptive to talking to the police. Based on the call the police received, they head to the courtyard portion of this abandoned building.
Without that tip, it's highly unlikely police would have even known about this courtyard because it's not visible from the street.
The police are alerted because there's an anonymous tip-off that somebody's been killed in that office block over the New Year, and the body's been dumped inside. So there's somebody who was there with a conscience has called the police so the police can go and investigate.
They find the body of a 20-some-year-old male, badly beaten, stripped, and laying there. The officers note not only is he bad and beaten, but he smells like bleach. He has no identification on him, and they believe that he did not get killed at this spot.
It doesn't take long for police to realize that this young man is the missing Hempfield student. After contacting his family, they quickly identified their John Doe as the missing 24-year-old Bill Henham.
The next day, his family had already paid a heartfelt tribute to Bill.
His family wrote of him, "Our son Billy was a man who walked his own beat, creative and independent. His gentle demeanor and belief that the world was a friendly place meant he made himself vulnerable at times. So many people have kindly shared their happy memories of him with us. Their love and kind words are giving us all huge support at this terrible time." One piece of the tribute is especially moving. His guardian angel, who had looked after him on so many other occasions, sadly lost sight of him on New Year's Eve.
It's now incumbent on police to pick up that lost trail, uncover the truth of what happened to Bill Henham that fateful New Year's Eve, and see justice through so that his family may find peace. Bill Henham is out for a night of partying and celebration. In the early dawn hours of New Year's Day, he stumbles upon a warehouse party. But the friendly and outgoing university student quickly finds out he's not welcome, and things turn hostile. Sadly, what might have been a memorable night ends in tragedy. Police must now piece together the final hours of the young man's life in the hopes of bringing those responsible to justice.
When someone young like this is murdered with their body just dumped as if it were trash, the police really want to solve the case quickly, but they still have to follow proper procedure.
The trick is we follow the murder investigation manual. There's a bit of gut feeling as well.
This is a crime scene with a lot of variables. For one thing, they're not even sure that the murder took place here. Bill may just have been dumped here. He could have been brought here from across town and murdered somewhere else. For now, they operate under the assumption that this is the crime scene.
Here we have, if you have a house where you have one person killing another and they both live in the same house, it makes it an awful lot easier from everybody's perspective. But here you have a 4-story building, a large number of people that already reside in the building, and a large number of people that are at the party as well. So you can imagine the disarray that's within that building.
Bill's body is sent for autopsy to determine cause of death.
Post-mortem is then held to find out the cause of Bill's death, and turns out he has about 60-odd injuries, including a brain hemorrhage, suffered quite a few cuts and bruises to the brain, 10 broken ribs, and a number of cuts and bruises to his hands and arms where he's been trying to defend himself from the blows.
Some of the injuries to Bill's body are consistent with being thrown or dropped from a height of about a dozen feet. But the lack of forensic evidence where his body's found suggests that Bill may have been beaten to death or close to death at a second sight.
You can only work with the initial information you have given to you. Obviously, there's a lot more coming through the next few days once CCTV has been viewed and witness statements from those who've been at the party. But your initial response to the scene would be to have a walkthrough of the scene, a crime scene assessment, a walkthrough of the scene to see exactly what's there.
A thorough forensic sweep of the building reveals multiple crime scenes.
So you know you've got basically 3 scenes. You've got 2 attack sites for the victim and the body deposition site. So those are your main 3 scenes that you'll be working. So you're not going to see everything on your first walkthrough. That's That's sort of quite obvious. So once I have completed a whole walkthrough of the scene, you then have it photographed. When the photographer's there, you're pointing out items of interest to you at that time. And then with further information coming through as it's CCTV, what witnesses are saying, it might give you a steer on what else you need to be looking for within that scene.
You have to have experience to know what's at a scene. This is why homicide detectives are picked to do their job. When they look at a set of human remains, they can tell by the positioning, by the circumstances, by the blood, if the body was killed there or dumped. So knowing where the crime occurred is the only way you're going to be able to go to court and prove what happened. If you're wrong on what you say about where this body was killed, your whole case could go down the drain. Because if you're wrong once, you're probably wrong twice.
The rooms on the main and second floor of the building show that there may have been some effort made to clean up Bill's blood and DNA evidence, but enough blood spatter remains that it tells a story. And investigators believe that from this, they can deduce that there may have been more than one individual responsible for beating Bill to death.
But investigators are going to need more than forensic evidence alone if they want to uncover the truth of how Bill was killed.
Thankfully for them, like most modern cities, Brighton has cameras everywhere.
There are a lot of security cameras in Brighton. Some of them are openly accessible to the police and the local authority. Others are protecting shops. Everywhere you have bars, pubs, corner shops that sell alcohol or liquor, there are usually security cameras inside and outside those buildings, and part of the deal is if you have a license to sell drink, then you have security cameras and you make the footage available to the police if they request it. And so the police were reasonably quickly able to put together a picture of Bill's last movements before he entered the squat and some of the comings and goings of the people who were either staying in the squat or who went there on New Year's Eve or in the early hours of New Year's Day and left the building later. And that proved really valuable in identifying who the police needed to speak to.
While police combed through hours of CCTV footage taken from around the city, one other important aspect of their investigation is obtaining a clearer picture of who the victim is.
You go and you review what you can see in your own mind, but also you look at the victim as well. If you find out how a person lived, you may find out how they died.
Bill was 24 years old. He was studying film in London and by all accounts wanted to make films, to tell stories. And I think he was keen to go out and experience life and see things for himself.
Seems everybody had a kind word for him, not a bad bone in his body. When he wasn't at university, he was down at his parents' house in Henfield.
Based on Ian Henham's statement, they locate the club where Bill spent much of the night.
They spoke to his parents, who were able to say where he'd been dropped off and where he said he was going that night, which was where he started his evening in Brighton.
The doorman remembers seeing Bill and escorting him out of the club, suggesting he go home and sleep it off. But he says that Bill wasn't argumentative at all. In fact, he was friendly and even walked away whistling.
The club turns over their security cam footage, which confirms the doorman's testimony.
So in an investigation like this, you know the body was moved. Now you have to go back and find where he was last seen alive, that you can put a time to it. So they go back and track the CCTV cameras, they talk to witnesses, they find out where he was, and basically step by step by step, they eliminate who he was with, who he was seen with, what he was doing, what state of intoxication was he in on the cameras, and where did you last place him alive.
Through viewing the CCTV footage, which comes from a myriad of sources, police can track the exact path Bill took.
The next thing we see, Bill was on CCTV at an off-licence at 4:30 in the morning. This is the last sighting of him. And across the road from this off-licence is the North Street. In North Street is this derelict four-storey building.
The footage tells police that Bill was alone when he left the club, so he must have met his killer at the party in the derelict building.
We saw in court video footage of Bill going into a building where there was a party going on. We call it a squat. There were just people who didn't own it, who weren't tenants, squatting in the building, just staying there, living there, some of them coming and going very temporarily, some of them sort of crashing out there, sleeping there. That night they were having a big party. Bill could hear the noise, the music, and as you watch that CCTV footage, the security camera footage, as he sort of gravitated towards that, I think his parents even said at the end of the case, they were sort of, even watching it, they're willing him, don't go in there, Bill, don't go in there, even though it's too late. Because, what seemed like a really great place to go held far more terrible dangers than any of us might have imagined.
This has to be absolutely excruciating for Bill's family, being able to see all the decisions he made and the path he took that led to his eventual death.
Police now face a challenge of combing through the security footage to identify who was at the party that night and who cut the promising life of Bill Hanham short. An autopsy reveals the 24-year-old Bill Hanham is viciously beaten to death. Investigators suspect it's carried out by more than one attacker. Though someone has clearly tried to hide the evidence of the crime, forensic analysis reveals Bill's DNA is in several rooms in the four-story derelict building. Police collect CCTV footage from several stops along Bill's path in an effort to piece together his final hours. But their biggest challenge is yet to come, as they attempt to track down witnesses to the grisly crime. Investigators face an enormous challenge in this case.
Bill's DNA is found in multiple locations. Blood spatter indicates that he was beaten in more than one room and probably by several individuals. And there's no telling how many people were at the party.
So your witness base is very shallow at this point in time. You need a witness to be able to confirm who beat this man to death. And you start going back to the roots, find out where they are, who they are, and you find them. And use informants, use your chain of people that you use on the street to find it out. It happens. You make it happen because it's a murder.
Police focus their efforts in trying to identify some of the people seen coming and going from the building.
And that proved really valuable in identifying who the police needed to speak to. And they made a number of arrests reasonably quickly. And again, this is just from memory, but I have a feeling that a couple of those people they arrested turned out actually to be key witnesses. The trouble is the people who did know something, in many respects, were those who were least likely to want to go and help the police. Having been told that they were at the scene, evidence showed they were at the scene, and that they were under suspicion, I think the onus suddenly falls on you to think about how much you explain and in what way you explain it. And I think in those circumstances, my feeling, listening in, watching the evidence, was that at least one of those people felt that they were in a tight spot.
I mean, the breakthrough basically comes with witnesses coming forward and saying what they saw.
And actually, the best thing to do was to be as truthful as they could be. And I picked up a sense that at least one of them was genuinely outraged by what happened, was probably powerless to do anything or much about it on the evening, but the least that could be done was to redeem for that by cooperating in a way that helped the police.
We have a fellow called Philip Mallia. He saw part of what, or he heard part of what was going on in the room, the torture chamber as it was known. He knew the 4 fellas who were in there, tell the police who they were, who was involved.
Mallia recounts what he witnessed that night.
Bill is taken up to a 2nd floor room where he's attacked, punched and kicked. He's then dragged down to the ground floor and security blocks off the party goes on the 1st floor landing.
He says that he heard screams and cries for help coming from the room, but when he tried to get in, Duchesne Miquel blocked the way. He threatened him, telling him to leave.
Another individual who attends the party is identified on the CCTV footage.
Police ID Donna Malloy, who's reluctant at first to trust the detectives. Since she was there that night to score drugs, she thinks she might have a lot to lose by telling the truth.
Donna Malloy corroborates other witness testimony in naming the 4 men responsible for beating Bill Hanham to death.
The upside for the police investigating this was that there were people in the building who had heard screams and in 1 or 2 cases had shown some curiosity, even if they'd been rebuffed, and they told their story.
What Donna says next goes beyond the story of a beating that gets out of hand. It shows intent to commit and cover up a murder.
During the post-mortem, the examiner finds that Bill's been doused in bleach. It's all over his skin and in his hair. Their conclusion is that the killers may have attempted to cover up any DNA that could have transferred from them onto Bill's body. This opinion is confirmed by the witness statement. She alleges that she saw the ringleader of the gang using a spray bottle of bleach to clean the crime scenes after the body had been moved.
So that's how it links it together, because the witness must be right. How would the witness know that the killers held a bottle and used it on the victim, unless you've seen it? So that's how you can corroborate witness accounts, because witness accounts can be varying, they can be different, and they can be wrong at times.
Police now have 4 names linked to Bill Hanham's killing. Gregory Hawley, 26, Duchesne Michael, 25, Lamette Gordon Carew, 18, and 16-year-old Elise Spence.
Now you have the suspects. You have done the investigation. You have to find them. Because of the transient nature of these squatters, there's no fixed address. You're basically searching the entire British Isle to find them. But it's going to be very difficult, it's going to be time-consuming, and the case is not over yet.
Days after the brutal beating death of 24-year-old Bill Hanham, and thanks to witness statements, police have learned the identities of the 4 men believed responsible.
The public pressure is immense as people in Brighton really want to see this case solved.
I don't think it was clear to us straight away just how awful what had happened is. Any murder is awful, I'm sure, but the way in which Bill was beaten and abused, what happened was just, terrible.
On January 3rd, 2020, police locate 3 of the 4 men squatting at a different location.
After the murder and police involvement, 3 of the suspects were arrested more or less straight away.
Duchesne is still on the loose. He's somewhere, they cannot find him. They want to get him off the street as quickly as possible because he's a danger to society, which they do 6 days later on June the 24th, 2021. He's arrested by Sussex law enforcement.
They were bailed. We've got fairly, you have an entitlement to bail in this country unless there's a good reason otherwise. And normally in murder cases, you don't get bail. But I think they were still trying to establish who did what in the building.
A 16-month investigation then began into this murder.
You go back and start over and keep building your case again. Meanwhile, the public thinks that you've not done your job, you've let these guys walk the street and they're upset, which is not the case. You've done the best you could till now. It just isn't good enough to meet the standard the court has set. We know at approximately 4:30 a.m., Bill is at a convenience store. He walks out, he hears a party across the street at a derelict building, and he heads towards it.
Bill goes into this party, and for a four-storey building, derelict building that used to be restaurants and offices. It's basically a squat, and it's run by a fella called Hawley, who is the sort of leader of the squat. He has another person looking after security on the door, and sadly for Bill, he'll also come across two young drug dealers, 18 and 16, who've come down from Croydon to sell drugs at the party. What we think happened is that somewhere along the line, Bill has had a dispute with Hawley. Now, he says Bill was becoming lippy and loud, but there's no other suggestion that actually occurred. But Hawley decides that he's going to do something about this. He may have said something about Hawley's girlfriend, but we can't be 100% certain on that at all. So he decides he's going to teach Bill a lesson. The four attackers have been drinking, taking drugs. Obviously, their state of mind is not what you would hope it would be. So Bill is taken up to a second-floor room where he's attacked, punched and kicked.
Bill's attacked, and, rather than just a bit of a roughing up, a brief fight, or perhaps even just chucking him out of the building, asking him to leave, it turned into this feeding frenzy of violence.
He's then dragged down to the ground floor, and we believe his security blocks off the party goers on the first floor landing. Bill's taken to another room called the torture chamber.
They've dragged him off into a side room. They really are giving him a beating, to the point where they've shut the door, and when someone knocks on the door to try to find out what's going on, they're told in no uncertain terms to go away. And I'm being very polite here. And very urgently to go away. And they're told they didn't see or hear anything. That it's very clear that by this stage, things have gone from being just a beating to taking a turn for the worse. It doesn't take long. I think they very quickly realised, actually, they've gone too far. And then they switch from hurting Bill to try to work out how to effectively finish him off and get rid of the body.
They believed that Bill had learnt Hawley's name and were frightened of repercussions further down the line, so they decided to do something about it and sadly finish Bill off.
So the perpetrators thinking, right, I can't let them live because I'm going to go to prison for a long time. And then they go that extra step. There's a thing called red mist, where you get that angry that you just lose it, basically, and lash out. But this is more calculated.
His body was then taken up to a balcony area and thrown at the rear of the building and thrown over. They'd removed his clothing. One of them had taken pictures of Bill partially clothed and naked, and they cleaned his body down with disinfectant to try and get rid of their DNA.
One thing that's still not clear is motive. Why did they attack him? Why did they kill him? Dealing with these type of individuals, sometimes for the normal person, the motive is invisible, and they will kill someone just for the fact that they intruded their space.
It's only my own personal view from what I've read and I understand is this is more of a power thing because somebody is in charge of that building, and Bill's upset that dynamic somehow.
While the witness statements and Bill's DNA help tell the story of what happened to him, there's one more piece that really confirms Hawley's guilt.
The irony on the forensic evidence is that this was a squat used by, lots and lots of people. He could have had a legitimate excuse for being in that building just as somebody who's been there to take drugs, and he could have been there, months beforehand. But the irony here is that he's tried to clean up his involvement in the murder, and by doing so has left his DNA on something that's so crucial that only the killer would use. So only the killers used the bleach bottle to clean up the DNA. And if he'd have just left it alone, we may never have found it. Circumstantial evidence alone may not be enough, but it can also convict. But when you link them both together, your case becomes a lot stronger. So in this case, a witness has seen or heard about a clean-up using disinfectant. Or forensically, the police find a bottle with a killer's DNA on there and can match the disinfectant to the disinfectant in Bill's hair.
After a 16-month investigation, on May 20th, 2021, Hawley, Spence, and Gordon Carew are all arrested and charged with murder. The police are still on the hunt for Michael. Crime Stoppers offers a £10,000 reward for any information leading to his arrest. Police continue their efforts to track down Duchesne Michael for his involvement in Bill Henham's beating death.
Duchesne is arrested by Sussex Police as part of Operation Gatling. The trial will commence. It's going to last about 4 weeks. The other 3 are already in custody, and it's going to be an extremely difficult trial, given the fact there's 4 of them and limited witnesses.
And it lasted 10 weeks, the trial. But I feel during that court case, a lot of what we got were some very precise pictures of very specific scientific evidence, for example, of security camera footage plotting people's movements.
After the initial arrests, clothes and shoes are collected from the 4 suspects. Experts are able to match some of the shoe imprints on Bill's body to the items they collected, as well as some DNA transfer.
And what nailed it down, really, as often in these cases, was the forensic evidence, DNA, traces of blood, and little flakes of skin and things like that end up on other people's clothing or theirs on yours, if you like, so that it put all 4 of the killers in the same room as Bill was when he died and to where his body was dumped.
Clearly, one of the witnesses who was brave enough to come to court and give evidence against the killers, her main focus, and she says, was to go and get drugs. But she saw what was going on and she knew it wasn't right. She heard that somebody had been killed, but she didn't want to believe it because her main focus is drugs. And I've seen that, and it really is, you know, that's the driving factor for the whole life. It's sad to see, but they are addicted. So it was really difficult, I would say, to get her to speak and to give evidence in a Crown court. I think that's the skill of the detectives, that they were able to engage with her and build up that trust and that confidence so that she gave her evidence. Because at the end of the day, it's not the police who decide the guilt, it's the jury.
After a 10-week trial, the jury comes back with their verdict.
Yeah, so the conclusion of the trial, all 4 defendants were found guilty and were given a minimum of life imprisonment. Hawley and Michael were given a minimum of 25 years imprisonment, and Gordon Carew and Spence were given a minimum of 18 years imprisonment. And again, that is a minimum sentence, so they will have to show the remorse and show that they've been rehabilitated before they're even considered for parole.
The astonishing thing is, I don't think any of them has said anything that gives us any greater understanding of what I can only describe as a senseless murder. There's no, to the best of my knowledge, there's no real remorse being shown. Nothing to explain why this started, why Bill, and why such a severe assault that turned fatal, that became fatal. It's just, yeah, some of those things I suspect will be known only among those who took part in it. And while I have my suspicions that, this is a place where there was a lot of drinking and drug taking, it does seem like at least one or two of those involved in this were, for want of a better phrase, sober enough or clear-minded enough to be in command of their faculties, to know what they were doing, and to mete out the most brutal assault for who knows what reason. And I don't think any of them have really said anything that helps explain. They've tried to make excuses, but that's very different in my book. It's not giving answers to why they started on someone and why it was as severe as it was. His parents spoke to the court very movingly. His mother's a nurse, his father's an architect. And they spoke about the son they loved, about how they brought up Bill, and the kind of genuinely lovely person that everyone says he was. And how they tried to keep him, how they tried to teach him the right values and to keep him safe, and how hard it was for them to appreciate it wasn't their failing, if you like, that had meant he wasn't safe that night, but that you can do your best and still things can go terribly wrong, and that's the sad thing I take away from it. But actually, with something like this, getting the investigation right was absolutely essential to telling the story of what happened and showing that even when bad things happen, and many of us are parents, no one wants to lose a child. Even when that happens, at least justice can be done. It doesn't bring back the person you've lost, but it goes some way, hopefully, to protecting others from the same plight in the future.